Namaskar students. Hope you are hale and hearty, taking care of your health and your studies. My name is Jyotsna and I am from Education Department, Chandigarh. There had been many kings in the history who fought wars, who won wars, either to expand their kingdoms or to save their kingdoms. But do you know, there was one king in the history of India who won the biggest war of his life. And one fine day, he just left it all. Who was it? He was from the great Mauryan dynasty. Yes, you got it right. So today we are going to talk about Ashoka, the emperor who gave up war. Yes, that's the chapter number 7 of grade 6 book, Our Past Part 1. So without wasting any time, let's get going. The Mauryas were a dynasty with three important rulers, Chandragupta, his son Bindusar, and Bindusar's son Ashoka. King Ashoka, the only king of India to give up violence after winning a war, was driven to do so because he was saddened by the aftermath of violence in the war. The Mauryan Empire was an efficient and highly organized autocracy with a standing army and civil service. That bureaucracy and its operation were the model for Arthashastra, the science of material gain, a work of political economy similar in the tone and scope to Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. In the wake of the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC, Chandragupta or Chandragupta Maurya, founder of the Mauryan dynasty, conquered the Punjab region from the southeastern edges of Alexander's former empire. The Seleucids, a contending dynasty for the Alexander's legacy, attempted to advance into India in 305 BC. They were defeated, and after the conclusion of a treaty, the Seleucids and Mauryans maintained friendly relations. Now enjoying peace along the western border, Chandragupta was free to focus his military exploits to the east and to the south. By the end of his reign, he had extended his empire across northern India. His son Bindusar continued the empire's expansion well into the Deccan, stopping around the region known today as Karnataka. Bindusar's son Ashoka, who reigned from 265 to 238 BC, added Kalinga to the already vast empire. That addition would be the last, however, as the brutal conquest of that region led Ashoka to abandon military conquest. Rather, he embraced Buddhism and instituted Dharma as the state ideology. Much is known of the reign of the Buddhist Mauryan emperor from the edicts inscribed on exquisitely executed stone pillars that he had erected throughout his realm. Those edicts constitute some of the oldest deciphered original texts of India. After his conversion, his notion of conquest consisted of sending many Buddhists throughout Asia and commissioning some of the finest works of ancient Indian art. Now let's talk about a very big kingdom, an empire. Ashoka was one of the greatest rulers of history. He ruled empire founded by his grandfather Chandragupta Maurya over 2300 years ago. He was supported by a wise man named Chanakya or Kautilya. Chanakya's ideas were written down in the Arthashastra. There were several cities in the empire marked with black dots on the map, which included the capital Patliputra, Takshila, and Ujjain, as well as Takshila, a gateway to the northwest, including Central Asia. Ujjain lay on the route from north to south India. Merchants, officials, and craft persons lived in these cities. In other areas, there were villages of farmers and herders. In central India, there were forests where people gathered forest produce and hunted animals for food. People in different parts of the empire spoke different languages and ate different kinds of food. They wore different kinds of clothes as well. So, how are empires different from kingdoms? Emperors need more resources than kings, as they are larger than kingdoms. They need to be protected by big armies, and they also need a larger number of officials who collect taxes. So, how was it ruling the empire? Large empire in different parts were ruled differently. The area around Patliputra was under the direct control of the emperor. Officials were appointed to collect taxes from farmers, herders, craft persons, and traders. These were the people who lived in villages and towns in that area. They also punished those who disobeyed the ruler's order, or the officials were given salaries. They also punished those who disobeyed the ruler's orders, and officials in these areas were given salaries. Messengers went to and fro. Also, spies kept a watch on the officials. The emperor supervised them all. With the help of members of the royal family and senior ministers, other areas or provinces were ruled from a provincial capital such as Takshila or Ujjain, with some amount of control from Patliputra. And royal princes were often sent as governors. Local customs and rules were probably followed, and there were vast areas between these centers. Mauryas tried to control roads and rivers important for transport. They collected whatever resources were available as tax and tribute. So, what was it, tribute? Unlike taxes collected on a regular basis, tribute was collected as and when it was possible from people who gave a variety of things, more or less willingly. So, let's talk about Ashoka, a unique ruler. Ashoka the Great was the third king of the Mauryan Empire, best known for his renunciation of war, development of concept of dhamma, pious social conduct, and promotion of Buddhism, as well as his effective reign of a nearly pan-Indian political entity. At its height, under the Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire stretched from modern day Iran through almost the entirety of the Indian subcontinent. Ashoka was able to rule this vast empire initially through the precepts of the political treatise known as Arthashastra, attributed to the Prime Minister Chanakya, also known as Kautilya and Vishnugupta, from the time span of 350 to 275 BC, who served under Ashoka's grandfather Chandragupta. And Chandragupta ruled from 321 to 297 BC, and he was the one who founded the Mauryan Empire. Ashoka means without sorrow, which was most likely his given name. He is referred to in his edicts carved in stones as Devanamapiya Piyadasi, which, according to scholars John Key, means beloved of the gods and gracious of men. He is said to have been particularly ruthless early in his reign until he launched a campaign against the kingdom of Kalinga in 260 BC, which resulted in some carnage, destruction, and death. That Ashoka renounced war and in time converted to Buddhism. devoting himself to peace as exemplified in his concept of Dhamma. Most of what is known of him outside of his edicts comes from Buddhist texts which treat him as a model of conversion and virtuous behavior. The empire he and his family built did not last even 50 years after his death. Although he was the greatest of the kings of one of the largest and most powerful empires in the antiquity. His name was lost to history until he was identified by the British scholar and Orientalist James Prinsep in 1837. Since then, Ashoka has come to be recognized as one of the most fascinating ancient monarchs for his decision to renounce war, his insistence on religious tolerance, and his peaceful efforts in the establishing Buddhism as a major world religion. Famous Mauryan ruler Ashoka was the first ruler who tried to take his message to the people through inscriptions. These inscriptions were in Prakrit and written in the Brahmi script. Now, what was this Kalinga war? The reasons for invading Kalinga were both political and economic. Kalinga was a prosperous region consisting of peaceful and artistically skilled people known as the Utkala. They were the first from the region who travelled offshore to the southeast for trade. For that reason, Kalinga had important ports and a powerful navy. They had an open culture and used a uniform civil code. Kalinga was under the rule of Nanda Empire. Until the empire's fall in 321 BC, Ashoka's grandfather Chandragupta Maurya had previously attempted to conquer Kalinga but had been repulsed. Ashoka set himself to the task of conquering the newly independent empire as soon as he felt he was securely established on the throne. Kalinga was a strategic threat to Mauryan Empire. It could interrupt communications between Maurya capital Patliputra and Mauryan possessions in central Indian peninsula. Kalinga also controlled the coastline for the trade in Bay of Bengal. Kalinga was the ancient name of coastal Orissa. Ashoka fought a war to conquer Kalinga. He was horrified when he saw the violence and bloodshed and so decided not to fight any more wars. He is the only king in the history of the world who gave up conquest after winning a war. Ramesh Prasad Mohapatra, from his book Military History of Odisha, has aptly mentioned that no war in the history of India as important either for its intensity or for its results as the Kalinga War of Ashoka. No wars in the annals of the human history has changed the heart of the victor from one of the wanton cruelty to that of an exemplary pity as this one. From its fathomless womb, the history of the world may find out only a few wars to its credit which may be equal to this war and not a single one that would be greater than this. The political history of mankind is really a history of wars, and no wars has ended with so successful a mission of the peace for the entire war-torn humanity as the War of Kalinga. And that gave birth to Dhamma. So what was Ashoka's Dhamma? So Dhamma did not involve worship of a god or performance of a sacrifice. He had a duty to instruct his subjects and was also inspired by the teachings of the Buddha. A number of problems troubled him. People in the empire followed different religions, which led to conflict. Animals were sacrificed, slaves and servants were ill-treated, quarrels in families and amongst neighbors. Ashoka's duty was to solve these problems. He appointed officials known as Dhamma Mahamatta, who went from place to place teaching people about Dhamma. His messages were inscribed on rocks and pillars. He instructed his officials to read his message to those who could not read it themselves. He also sent messengers to spread ideas about Dhamma to other lands such as Syria, Egypt, Greece, and Sri Lanka. He built roads, dug wells, and built rest houses and arranged for medical treatment for both human beings and animals. Among his works of public utility were the founding of hospitals for men and animals and the supplying of medicines and the planting of roadside trees and groves, digging of wells and construction of watering sheds and rest houses. Orders were also issued for curbing public laxities and preventing cruelty to animals. With the death of Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire disintegrated and his work was discontinued. His memory survives for what he attempted to achieve and the high ideals he held before himself. Most enduring were Ashoka's services to Buddhism. He built a number of stupas, commemorative burial mounds are the ones which are known as stupas, and monasteries, and erected pillars on which he ordered inscribed his understanding of religious doctrines. He took strong measures to suppress schisms within the Sangha, the Buddhist religious community, and prescribed a course of scriptural studies for adherents. The Sinhalese chronicles Mahamvasa says that when the order decided to send preaching missions abroad, Ashoka helped them enthusiastically and sent his own son and daughter as missionaries to Sri Lanka. It is a result of Ashoka's patronage that Buddhism, which until then was a small sect confined to particular localities, spread throughout India and subsequently beyond the frontiers of the country. I know today's session must have been very fruitful for you. So let's try to analyze what we have actually extracted out of today's session. On your screens, you can see a statement followed by it are 4 options. You have to pick the correct option. So, without wasting any time, let's get going. So, my first question is, which are the animals shown in our national emblem? Is it goats, lions, bulls, or none of these? Yes, in our national emblem, we find lions. So, what was the name of grandfather of Ashoka? Was it Krishna, Mahavira, Siddhartha, or Chandragupta Maurya? Yes, it is option D, Chandragupta Maurya. In which book were Chanakya's ideas written? Ramayana, Mahabharata, Arthashastra, or none of these? Yes, it was famous book called Arthashastra. Who was supported by a wise man named Chanakya? Ashoka, Bindusar, Chandragupta, or all of these? It was Chandragupta who was supported by a wise man named Chanakya. Who was Bindusar's son? Chandragupta, Siddhartha, Ramakrishna Paramhans, or Ashoka? Yes, it is Ashoka, who was the son of Bindusar. From which area was Takshila and Ujjain ruled? Patliputra, Bihar, Delhi, or Agra? Yes, option A, Patliputra is correct. I hope in today's session you have got to know why Ashoka was always called Ashoka the Great. For the obvious reason that there can be very few warriors of his stature who one fine day just stopped it all and started treading on the path of peace. Not only treading on the path of peace, but they started spreading this message to every nook and corner of the world. That's why he is still reminded in the world. We'll be back with many more videos. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, and keep studying. Namaskar.